Hi, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about finals preparation, some study tips. My name is Jennifer Luarca, and I am coming from the Academic Coaching Program in the Learning Center, located in the Student Success Center, room 160. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the time management aspect of finals planning. It's really critical that you know your timeline. By that, I mean we need to know at this point in the semester when your finals are. And when you should begin to start to prepare for those. For this semester, spring 2020, our finals will begin Monday, May 11th, and they will go through Saturday, May 16th. So I would recommend, if you haven't already, get those final dates down on a calendar. That should be available in my CSULB under exam schedule, but you can also Google final exam schedule at CSULB, and it will give you a schedule that you can then kind of layer the classes that you're taking, the days and times onto the schedule, and it will tell you when your finals are. Also, a great place to check is your syllabus, so I would check in there as well. Once you have your final exam dates in a calendar, you want to start to identify study dates and times throughout the month. Starting in April, you should be thinking about preparing for finals. When you're thinking about finals preparation, we want to think, is this going to be a sectional final or is it going to be cumulative? If cumulative, you can start to study now, right? We can start to go back and solidify previously learned information because, of course, you can't study things you haven't learned yet. But that's why it is possible to begin to study as soon as now, reinforcing learned material. You want to also start to prepare study tools early. So if you are having a sectional final, you may not be able to start to study now, but as you get new lecture material, you want to start to convert that into your study format. That may be flashcards, that may be creating study questions, whatever it is you use to begin to think about testing. You want to do that each week as you learn new material, as you inch closer towards May. And then you want to reach out and start to set study sessions up. Keep in mind that your peers are in other classes, so they may not be fully available to you. That's why you want to lock them down early if you want to set up study groups. An important concept to think about as you are studying is you really want to start to create a framework for ideas. We want to think about relationships and hierarchies of concepts. So we always want to think about learning from the general idea down to the specific detail. Most students, when they study, focus on detail only. The challenge with that is that if your brain doesn't see a connection, a clear connection across material or relationships within material, it is going to struggle to retain that. We crave connections between people and also between concepts. We want to see what relationships are. Our memory system is set up that way, so it's important to point that out as much as possible when you're learning things. So rather than getting a study guide and filling out all the definitions, I would recommend getting a study guide and putting those concepts into related groups of 4 or 5 concepts and learning those concepts together as a group. Again, our memory system craves connection, so the more you can set clear connections up within the material you're learning, the better. This will allow for deeper processing of information, stronger recall, and long-term storage of material. If you understand it, you don't have to memorize it, so to speak. We want to think about, going along those lines, is reviewing old information and then adding new material. This will activate prior knowledge, allow your memory system to see clear connection between old material and new material, and it will help you with repetition, which is a key ingredient for long-term memory. So I would recommend, once you crack open the book or notes for this week's material, we want to first refresh ourselves on last week's material. What did we learn? What are the key concepts? And then how does this week's material relate to that? Or how could it possibly relate? Start to activate that connection because that will allow for easier storage of new material. We want to also think about, when we're creating study tools, creating tools that will force you to do the recall on your own. If you are just studying by looking at a bunch of material, there's no way to test to understand if you've retained it. So we want to think about creating study tools that will help you produce information as much as possible. So if we're thinking about concept maps, we are basically putting keywords on a page and we have to discuss the relationship between one keyword and another keyword, right? When we're making flashcards, I like to limit students to 5 keywords or less. You should be able to fill in the gaps between those keywords. We're thinking about mnemonics. So a mnemonic is a series of letters that forms another word that helps you with recall. So when we're thinking about, what's a mnemonic? FOIL for learning math, order of operations, right? First, outer, inner, last. FOIL. Yeah, I think that's right. But we want to try to make up songs or mnemonics for concepts that we're learning. That will help us with retention as well, because we're connecting something we don't know to something we already know. And then when you're studying in groups, it's great to be able to explain things to one another. Best way to test for understanding is if you can explain it clearly to somebody else. This seems simple and straightforward and obvious, but it isn't always. When you are sitting down to study, you need to make sure that the time you have to study, you are genuinely free. Your brain is not focused on other things, that you're not tired or fatigued, because if you study when you're really wanting to do something else, you are not going to be focused. We want to make sure that we're setting measurable goals for each study session. So starting the session out by saying, at the end of this half hour, I'll be able to explain this concept and give an example of it. And then hold yourself to it. At the end of the study session, test your understanding, okay? And one way to do that is using this formula HW to the 5th power. You can create questions about any concept just by putting this word in front of the concept. How, who, what, where, why, and when. These questions are great too because they will force you to think not only in terms of knowledge level, so just understanding, but it will force you to apply your knowledge. So how does this thing work? When would you use it? Where does it apply? What's an example of it? Who might use this information, or who might this apply to? So now instead of just thinking about the concept by itself, we're thinking about it in context of how it works and lives in the real world. We want to also think about our focus time. So we want to work with our focus time, not against it. We want to space out our study. If you could study 3 times for a half hour each throughout the week, that's going to be better for you in the long term rather than 1 hour and a half study session. Because if you see things more often, you tend to remember them more. Okay? We want to avoid cramming at all costs. It works sometimes. That's why we do it. But it's not great for long-term memory. So typically if we cram, we'll go into the exam session, we walk out and we forget everything. We don't want that to happen. We want to really maximize our retention of the material, especially if it's a major course, which means we should study for long periods, short sessions over long periods of time. So like I said, 30 minutes, 3 times a week is better than 1.5 hour session, okay, from a memory perspective. Our short-term memory will really only hold 7 to 10 items for a short period of time, and then we tend to lose it. Also, it's important to think about if we're under stress, typically our short-term memory isn't functioning well. So if we're holding all our information in short-term because we crammed, if we're stressed out in a test situation, typically we can't access that as efficiently as we can our long-term memory. So again, it's much better if we can study things often, right, throughout a month, several times a week, rather than just once or twice in that month, okay? We want to also think about our natural focus time. Some people can focus for an hour and some people can focus for 15 minutes. You want to find out what works for you and you want to work with it, okay? You want to be aware of your surroundings and how those affect your focus time. Sometimes we like quiet, sometimes we like noisy. Keep in mind that artificial lighting we use in most of our educational institutions is fluorescent, and that increases eye fatigue because of the photons our eyes have to filter. So it's much better if you can find natural lighting. You'll probably be able to stay focused a little longer, okay? And I've said this several times already, but start early and study often. We want a lot of repetition, a lot of review, a lot of small focused chunks of study rather than long unfocused chunks of study, okay? We want to think about being as creative as possible when we study too. So banish the traditional ideas of sitting quietly and looking at things. That's typically not the way we learn. We learn by doing and seeing and creating. So the more creative you can get, the better. I usually tell students, think about your hobby or the thing you're good at. How did you learn to do that? And try to mimic that in your study sessions. That might be standing up and explaining something on a whiteboard. That might be drawing charts and diagrams or colorful pictures. We want to gravitate towards what works and what keeps our interest, because that means we'll do it more likely, okay? We also want to think a little bit about the way we're going to be tested. So of course we don't want to study for the test, but we are going to be tested. So we want to simulate the test as much as possible in our study sessions so we can get used to it. We want to review old exams, go in, talk to your professor, look at those tests. How are those questions phrased? How many questions are there? Are you responsible for knowledge, just a definition, or are you responsible for application, where you're given an example and you have to explain it, right? That should indicate different ways to study, okay? So we want to reflect on old test experiences. We want to think about time conditions. Unfortunately, we're timed on tests. So we want to, in some point in our study, we want to institute a time constraint. So maybe, answer these 5 problems in 5 minutes, or explain these 2 concepts in 6 minutes. Depends on the time to problem ratio you have on your exam, but you want to mimic that a little as you study as well, okay? Predict exam questions and think about combining multiple concepts into one question. We have to consider that our professors are under restraints when they're creating tests. They can't ask us individual questions about each concept. They are going to have to combine concepts to be able to assess your knowledge. So as you study, think about, how do these concepts relate, and could I potentially have a question that involves all 3 of these concepts, right? And again, create study useful tools. Don't just do the study guide if that doesn't work for you. You may want to create flashcards. You may want to, heck, you could even record yourself on your phone and listen to it, right? Do little tutorials. Create a study tool that you're going to want to use, not one that you have to use, okay? And as we're thinking about learning, it's really important to think in the context of Bloom's taxonomy. The levels of learning are underlying the way instructors teach and assess knowledge. For your lower division courses, 100, 200 level classes, you're going to be at the bottom of this light bulb at the knowledge and comprehension levels. Typically, and you'll see in the light bulb, there are verbs there. You can utilize those verbs to guide your study at those levels. So typically at those levels you have to arrange or define or describe or explain things, classify or group items when you're being tested. If you're moving up towards graduate or upper division coursework, so 300, 400 level coursework, you're going to be in that green application zone. You are going to be asked to apply concepts. It's not enough to be able to define it. You're going to have to actually show how it works in the real world or identify an example of it. So our study tools should incorporate real world examples as much as possible, okay? And the higher level you go on this taxonomy, the higher level you go in education. So typically grad school is going to be looking at analysis, synthesis, and maybe some evaluation. Definitely doctoral level is going to be evaluation. So this taxonomy is really nice, and I like this diagram a lot because it does give you verbs to guide your study at each level. This is also a really nice tool when you're looking back at the exam. Which level of learning is that exam assessing, given the verbs that are here? And try to incorporate that as much as you can into your study sessions. All right, that's it for me. That was quick finals prep workshop, but if you want some more help, you can always make an appointment with me for free. I am Jennifer Luarca. I am in the Learning Center. You can schedule with Pat Malevy as well, who is another academic coach at the Learning Center. Instructions are at the bottom of your screen. To make an appointment, you can go into my CSULB, click on the SSC Advising and Tutoring button. Up in the right-hand corner is going to be a button that says Get Help, and you can go ahead and click on that. It will allow you to select academic coaching, and it will direct you to my name, Jennifer, or Pat's name. And you can schedule with us for more information. Okay, hopefully you found this helpful, and good luck studying for finals.